Thank you, guys. Good morning. We're taking this session as Tracking Political Extremists, and we're receiving these great colleagues here. We're receiving first David Bass. He has worked as a reporter at Extremism since 2007. In 2014, his first book, Keep Sweden Swedish, came out, and last year his following book about Swedish nationalism, Win or Die, was just released. So let's welcome David. And we are also here with Michael Colborn. He's a journalist and a researcher at Bellingcat. He has written extensively about radical right, and his current work is focused on far right and all over the world. This is what he just told me. So let's welcome Michael. And for last, but very important, our Hannah Gaze. She's a senior researcher and a journalist at Southern Poverty Law Center. She's focused on white power movement. And let's welcome Hannah.
Is it that one? Oh, it's working. Good, good. Okay. So I'm working at Extremism. It's a classic tabloid. It was founded during the Second World War. And it was founded as a tabloid with a mission of tracking Nazis and other extremists. I mentioned this because I think it's a key factor, us doing this for such a long time. And that's a really important factor, us having this experience. Because even though the extremist world tend to change over time, of course, much of it stays the same. When it comes to methods, activism, and even people, we can see that people that joined the movement in the 90s are still active. And also, I have done a lot of reporting that people that joined the Nazi movements in the 90s or later turned up nowadays as politicians in the Sweden Democrats. You know, that's the big anti-immigration party here in Sweden. So it's a good thing that you can rest assured that the research you're doing today will become useful in years to come. So having this historical perspective, it's very good because using all that information, it comes back to you. If you have the time, if you have the energy to build your own archive, that is a very good thing, and that's what we are basically doing. So as I said, we were founded during the Second World War. And us building these archives is a big priority. Here are pictures from some Nazi rallies in Sweden. This last picture is from Gothenburg 6 years ago. It was a big demonstration. I think it was about 700 Nazis marching in the streets here. These are, of course, very public events, so you can go there. And I think it's a very good opportunity. It can become useful because you can see who turns up, who are wearing these uniforms, who are talking to who, and also if there are, you can see and hear if there are guests from other countries, like Nazi parties from other countries, supporting this Nazi group. This is the Nordic resistance movement. Using this information, just by looking at who turns up here, you can start building, you can start logging people. You can see that, oh, this guy, he turns up at this rally, this demonstration. You have a picture of him there, and you can start building resumes for all these persons. Of course, this is very time-consuming, but as I said, it can become useful. And then you can see that this guy has a Nazi history dating 10 years back, and you can see he was at that demonstration, he did that, the police caught him with a knife that year, and so on. This is very useful. When it comes to the Nordic resistance movement, they also tend to post reports about their activism on their websites, the so-called kamprapporter. It's big things and small things. Even if they hand out leaflets outside a grocery store, they tend to take a picture and they write, this last Saturday we were there handing out leaflets. This is, of course, a lot of information, but most of it is not useful. But you can get an idea of their activism, and when you find something remotely useful, you should save it. Make a print screen, download the videos, download the pictures, and of course, make it searchable by names, dates, and places, because when you're building these archives, you have to make it searchable. That's the whole idea. So you can see that who were at that place at that time, it can become useful, but once again, it can be very time-consuming. Well, these demonstrations and these kamprapporter, they are of course very public information, and one can go on this website and get a hold of it. A bit more useful, trying to get some idea about their internal discussion is following their chat groups. It can be on Telegram, and it used to be also on VK. Here's their Russian site for the Nordic resistance movement. Some of these groups are open for everyone. Other groups you have to be members. And if you have the time with fake accounts, you can, after a while, maybe get access. This is, of course, a part of their propaganda, but you can get an idea of how their internal discussion is, and also if someone is falling out of the movement, ending up in bad standing, you can get that kind of information, and that is very good if you want to approach people that have inside information. You can get hold of those names. And another thing, you maybe have recognized that every now and then these chat forums or web shops tend to get hacked. And sometimes these leaks are posted online, and you can read it, or you can have contact with people who have hacked them. We have done a lot of this, mostly exposing politicians from the Sweden Democrats supporting the Nazi movements by buying Nazi propaganda or supporting Nazis in chat forums. This is, of course, very good information. Okay, this is me at a Nazi rally. The police made me wear this yellow thing. I usually don't wear it. It's me being an, involuntary guest at another live-streamed web show by the Nazis. And of course, they do this. They have their own photographers, and they take pictures of us, and they take pictures of people protesting. That's a way of them scaring people. They want people to be afraid. But I think it's okay. We take pictures of them. Of course, they can take pictures of us. We ask them questions. They can ask us questions. So it's not a problem. This is the major Nazi website in Sweden, Nordfront. I've been featured there many times. They're writing articles about me every now and then. And of course, if your mother or grandmother sees this, it isn't so nice. But once again, we write about them, they can write about us. And maybe you think, well, it isn't so nice being once again written about on a Nazi website. But I tend to think that this is something good for me. Me doing this for such a long time, I'm somewhat of a celebrity in this environment. All the Nazis know who I am. That can be a problem, but I also think it's very good, because whenever someone decides to, I want to speak to a reporter, I want them to think about me. I want to be top of mind in their world. So I have been featured in many articles, just to give you examples. It goes on, but you get the idea. And of course, I don't think it's a problem. Well, it can be a problem in some aspect. Many years ago, I did this. I went undercover, posing as a Muslim hater, an anti-jihadist. I approached a Swedish group that traveled to London for a big demonstration organized by the English Defence League. I had a hidden camera, and that's, you see the arrow, that's me among all the hooligans. I think it was a very good story. But this method, going undercover, of course it can be very effective, but it's also controversial. I don't really recommend it in that many cases, because it is often very time-consuming and it can become dangerous. If your cover gets blown, it can really become dangerous. But I think that me doing this now is not an opportunity. They would recognize me in a second, so that's a problem with myself being a celebrity with the Nazi groups. So instead, a couple of years ago, I did this story. I went undercover in groups that supported ISIS. We wanted to see, this was after the fall of the caliphate, we wanted to see if the ISIS supporters, were they still active, how is the propaganda, what are they doing? It started online, it took several months. I worked myself inside these closed groups, and at the end I managed to set up meetings with a couple of them. This is me confronting one of the most notorious ISIS recruiters in Sweden. She thought that she was going to meet the sympathizers, that was going to give her money to send down to Syria, to continue the fighting, to give to people that were imprisoned in those ISIS camps. But instead she met me and a cameraman. Well, I'm not such a big celebrity among jihadis, so it was no problem for me doing this. Okay, I think I'm gonna end there. If you want to get in contact with me, this is my email address.
I'll wait until I get switched over here. But in the meantime, until I get switched over, thanks very much, everybody, for taking the time to come out to talk about, to hear us talk about what can be a very serious topic. As you can, once I get, can you get it set up into the slideshow? There we go. As you can see from my choice of GIF, whatever, sometimes you have to have a sense of humor about the absurdity of a lot of what we cover. So what I'm going to do with the time that I have here is the gist of what I'm going to do. Well, first I want to stress this point here, is that especially when talking about far-right extremism, the vast majority of far-right extremists these days, and the related spheres, the manosphere, QAnon type worlds, conspiracy worlds, what have you, they almost all leave some kind of digital footprint. And the best kind of information that they might leave is actually what we call a belly up. We tell in our trainings, we refer to it as accidental data. It's data that they don't know that they've posted or shared. It's data that data or information that they don't even understand is data or information. They don't understand that it can be useful, especially when researching the far right. using open sources, using digital investigative techniques, that is your best friend. What I'm going to talk mostly about in this presentation is geolocation with two examples. I believe geolocation is really underused in journalism on the far right. I understand that geolocation can be quite intimidating, especially when people think of the words Bellingcat and geolocation. They think of a lot of the other kinds of geolocations that we do, like geolocating Russian war crimes in Ukraine, things like that. But it is something that I think needs to be used a lot more. And I'll conclude with just a few simple tips, tools, tricks, little things that can really make the difference for tracking individuals or groups on the far right, but also more broadly, for those of you who obviously are journalists writing about any number of different topics. A lot of what I talk about in the next few minutes is actually useful for that as well. So we're nice and ecumenical here. So geolocation. Why should we geolocate in journalism on investigating the far right? Well, I reduced it to 3 reasons here. First is verification. If you want to establish, say, that a far-right extremist group, say a far-right extremist group on their Telegram channel has, say, posted that they hosted an event in Stockholm or in Gothenburg or wherever, and you can geolocate to verify, oh, is this event actually in this place? Sometimes it might be, but sometimes it isn't, and that can lead you down a thread of what could be a different story. Another reason, as you'll see with some of the examples that I have, is about accountability. If somebody, say, is not permitted by law to be in a certain country or in a certain place, if you can geolocate them in that place, well, you have a story. Or if you, in one case that I did recently, it was a very quick geolocation when Andrew Tate was released from house arrest in Romania in August. One of the first things that he posted was a video boasting about some of the things that he did his first night off house arrest, and there was a video of him at a restaurant. So I quickly geolocated the restaurant because I knew that despite him being released out of house arrest, his conditions were that he had to stay in Bucharest. So I quickly wanted to geolocate it just in case it was outside of Bucharest, but no, it was in Bucharest, but now I know. And lastly, a reason to geolocate is to build up a knowledge base. If you over and over with a specific far-right group or individual, if you geolocate them, to different locations, you see the events they go to, you see the areas in a city, a region, a country where they congregate, you can start to understand their behavior. You can start to form patterns, start to see patterns with their behavior, and you can even start predicting their behavior. When you see, after you've done a few geolocations, or you kind of almost get to know where a far-right individual or group might tend to hang out, you can see a picture and already know where to start looking. And a lot of times, as with some of the examples that I'll show you, you'll be right. So, sorry, I don't mean to breathe too heavily into the microphone here. So the first example of geolocation is from an article that we at Bellingcat published last week, and it's about this lovely fellow here. This is okay, you can see the individual in question. I will let you draw your own judgment as to what his character might be like. Your judgment is right. But as you can see from the headline, our article was about that this individual, his name is Kent McClellan. He's an American neo-Nazi who goes by the pseudonym of Boneface. He insists still, even yesterday to me in a message, he insists that he fought in Ukraine with both Right Sector and the Azov Regiment in 2014 and 2015, and again in 2022. He even insists that he was under siege at Mariupol in 2022. So the gist is, no, he didn't. But we figured this out pretty easily based on looking at court records and other digital evidence where there's no credible evidence that he was even anywhere near Ukraine. And the reason why he came to more media prominence in the United States and a bit more internationally recently is because, as you can see from the picture, he was at a neo-Nazi rally at Disney World in Florida, and then a lot of right-wing conspiracists like Laura Loomer started to, well, go absolutely nuts. So anyways, in the course of researching the story, before we publish, I reach out to him for for a right of reply. And I tell him, we're going to publish an article that says, pardon my language, we're going to publish an article that says you're full of shit, is essentially what I politely told him. I'm more professional than that, don't worry. But he still insisted that he had gone there, and he sent me a screenshot and then a link to this video. It's a video that was posted in September 2022. If you can see down at the bottom there, I probably have a laser pointer there. Oh, nice, I do. It's from his account, and it's a video that he says is him firing an RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade, at a Russian tank. Now, the problem is, I already know where the source of that video is, and I know that it's 99.9% not him. I already knew where to look to find the original source of this video. It was originally posted in February 2022 from a completely unrelated Ukrainian Instagram account, and just a few days after the start of the invasion, and the video is identical. Like, every part of it is identical. And in this original Instagram post where the video came from, just to be clear, this Instagram post has nothing to do with the far right. This is just a Ukrainian soldiers, group of soldiers account. And in Ukrainian there, it says the location of the video is on the Zhytomyr highway, which leads west of Kiev towards the city of Zhytomyr. So we could take them at their word, or we probably can take them at their word when you see that and think, okay, well, it probably is somewhere on this highway. But what I wanted to do was find the exact location of this other video, so then I could effectively go back to my friend Mr. Boneface and see, kind of trap him in a lie. So it might seem hard, but it didn't actually take me that long to geolocate it. It was because, one, it was along this highway, and there are only a few spots on this highway where there are these the sound barriers or whatnot along the sides through some of the towns. And after about 15, 20 minutes, I found it was in this town called Kalinivka, which is about 40 kilometers west of Kiev. So now I know literally the exact location of the video. So what I did then is I asked McClellan/Boneface, I asked him kind of deliberately naively, I asked him, oh, well, have you fought in any other parts of Ukraine? Because he insists he was in eastern Ukraine and Donbass fighting. And he tells me, no, I've only ever fought in eastern Ukraine. Now, you don't need to be a Ukrainian geography expert to realize that the location of this video versus where he fought are about 700 kilometers apart. So he sent me a video claiming it was him that was filmed in a location that he himself told me he had never been. So he trapped in one of many lies. And this is just one example. I mean, there's so, if you go and read the article, it really is a treat in the psychology of how somebody can just insist on a lie over and over again, and how to push back, and how to push back against what's fabricated, quote unquote, evidence that somebody can present to you. But this geolocating a completely unrelated video, I was able to go beyond what other people online had done, and I was able to essentially trap this guy in a nice, convenient little lie, even though I'll give an update on Boneface. I think I did just mention, he messaged me yesterday. He told me I should investigate that Highway 27, and then he blocked me, so I don't know what he wants. But he was never in Ukraine, don't worry. The next geolocation I'm going to show you, I'm not going to do it because we don't have that kind of time, is about this fellow. This is another American far-right extremist. His name is Robert Rundo. There's enough of a backstory to him, but I'll try to tell you as briefly as possible. He's an American far-right extremist. He was a co-founder of the violent Rise Above movement. He was involved in violence at rallies in California in 2017. In 2018, he faced US federal charges, but in 2019, those charges were temporarily thrown out, and then he fled to Central and Eastern Europe, well, to the Balkans. But by last year, the charges had been reinstated, so he's essentially a man on the run in Southeastern Europe. And he posted these photos in late February of this year. And by this point, I'd already written about him 3 times. I geolocated him in Serbia and got him kicked out of the country. I geolocated him in Serbia again, and as far as I can tell, he was maybe politely asked to leave the country again. And a few months before this, I'd geolocated him to Bulgaria, to the city of Plovdiv. So when I saw him post these videos in February of earlier this year, I saw these photos, and he's clearly made it difficult to geolocate on purpose. Just for reference, the black over the what looks like a logo there, that's from me. This is a screenshot of my tweet about it, because I didn't want to give him oxygen even by his far-right fashion brand, which for people who don't know, far-right fashion is a thing, and I would love to talk about it more. But you can see what he's done with these pictures is he's blurred out what he thinks is information that I could use to geolocate it. You can see signs in the background here, he's completely blurred out, so I can't tell what language it is. But there are three things. One, I correctly speculated that it was somewhere in Bulgaria because he had been there. And I didn't think he would have left the country by that point. The two other clues that I used to geolocate it were very subtle ones. One were these poles by the side of the road, and because I've done reporting from Bulgaria before, I know this might seem like a very intense detail, but sometimes these are the details that matter with geolocation. I know that the bigger cities of Sofia and Plovdiv have different poles. And another clue is that you can tell that the street it's on a grid and that it's turning into a one-way street. So what I did was there's Bulgaria, I looked at a few different cities, quickly just on Google Maps to find small cities that had grid layouts on their streets. I looked at this city called Stara Zagora, and I saw, if you can see there on the map, a nice grid layout. So I went and looked on Google Street View at a few of those streets, and I kind of thought, when I saw some of the pictures, oh, I bet this is it. Because I saw similar poles on the side of the road, and just the look of the town, I was like, okay, I bet it's here somewhere. So after a few minutes on Google Street View, I found the location there. You can see it there, the other side of the picture. Just go back. You can even see there's the same sticker on the left turn thing in the background. So then I geolocated it. Then I used the demon platform that is Twitter, which is probably going to die soon, and I think that's better for everyone. But so I posted this, essentially announcing to him, like, hey, these pictures you thought were impossible to geolocate, I geolocated them. And so at this point, I kind of had two theories about what he might do. I actually thought he would be more likely to hide out in Bulgaria to try to stay there. At that point, I thought there was a warrant out for his arrest. So I thought, okay, he'll either try to hide out in Bulgaria, or if he feels the heat is on, he'll go to another country, but he doesn't have a lot of other places to go. He's been kicked out of Serbia, probably not likely to go back to Greece. He'd been there. No way he's going to Turkey. He has never posted about North Macedonia. I don't even know the country exists. And so that leaves the option of Romania. And I was actually checking my old messages before we came in here. I messaged a friend of mine, and actually even before these photos were posted, and I said, if he leaves Bulgaria to another country, it's probably going to be Romania, because he posted things from another far-right group in Romania a few times. But a few weeks later, he got arrested in Romania. He decided to, with fake ID, I've since heard, I'd heard on a podcast, actually a Nordic resistance movement podcast, with a friend of Rundo's from Serbia, saying that he explicitly left Bulgaria because of me. That he left because these geolocations kept chasing him around. So and his Serbian friend, talking to the Nordic resistance movement, even explicitly said it was a mistake to go to Romania. And it was also a mistake, as he did, to work out publicly with all his visible tattoos showing, so he got arrested at a gym there. And as you can see, one of the co-authors on this piece with the SPLC is Hannah. Hi, Hannah. So with those geolocations, with the time that I have, I just want to quickly show some of the tools that I use for research on far-right extremism. These are tools that I use to do what we call a Bellingcat pivoting. There can be other words for how you describe it. But what we call pivoting in our trainings is a way to just pivot from one piece of information to another and find out as much information as you can about a group or an individual. And I'll just go quickly through these so I don't cut into Hannah or anybody else's time. Google Lens and Google image search also applies to Yandex as well. If you are doing Yandex image search, actually works quite well for some things, especially if you're doing things obviously related to Russia, but the Google Lens is very helpful for geolocation, especially in urban areas. The What's My Name app, there's similar apps, similar websites like that can let you see usernames that are used across websites. Epios has been a godsend for me. You can see what, with a Gmail, an email or a phone number, what services that email has been used to sign up with, and even sometimes an ID. Like, for example, a Skype account with a far-right extremist name, so you know it's their email. Truecaller is a somewhat sketchy, not somewhat sketchy, it is sketchy, crowdsourced caller ID app, and I've used that with a phone number to put it into the app, and it tells you basically what it thinks the name associated with that phone number is. It's crowdsourced from people who download and consent to have their data scraped by the app. But like I say, be careful with that, because I can talk, if you're interested in that and don't know about it, I can explain more to you after. Forensically is a nice little tool to look for photo manipulation of photos, but I don't use it that often, but I wanted to mention it. And this web recorder, archiveweb.page, I literally started using 2 weeks ago because one of the members of our tech team recommended that I use it for websites like Instagram that don't work with the Internet Archive. I can talk more about these later offline, or if you want to hassle me in the hallways. There's also these and others are on our investigation toolkit, bit.ly, it's very small, sorry, bit.ly/bcattools. You'll be able to find it. It has these and all sorts of other tools there. Quickly, please hassle me after if you don't catch this in time. I just want to make sure I get through everything. There are Telegram bots that you can use, because the far right obviously is quite active on Telegram. I use some TG scan robot and ID bot. There are other apps, but they can be quite useful to figure out what public groups a Telegram user is part of. That can help you understand their behavior or the things that they're interested in. Just to go make sure I don't. Browser extensions are a godsend for me because, well, they save time. There's a lot of things related to the far right that I would love to look at, but I don't have the time to. But if you have browser extensions like search by image, Revi, or Invid, it makes it so much easier for you to right-click and search an image, search a clip from a video across all sorts of different search engines. Wayback Machine browser extensions, again, see something you want to archive, click archive it. You don't have to mess around with opening another window. Single file I use for websites like Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn, where the Internet Archive, for various reasons that I won't get into, doesn't work for those websites, although it only saves it on your computer. It doesn't save it publicly, but this is still a good alternative. Command line tools, that's a representation of me using command line tools because I am not very techy, but these command line tools, Instaloader, YouTube Downloader, FFmpeg is something I use to get clips or screenshots from videos, and you can do some interesting video editing. And Telepathy is a command line tool I've used some to scrape data from Telegram. Apologies for going a bit fast. If you didn't catch all of these, please come hassle me after, or wherever you see me, or email me, and I will be happy to share these with you. A few quick final points here about the need to protect yourself, which I think we all know, but I really want to reinforce that, especially in the context of doing any kind of research, even just digital research on the far right. For one, you really need to be using separate accounts that are unconnected to your work or personal accounts. I have made the mistake in the past of searching on my personal Instagram or Facebook for looking at profiles from my personal account, and there's a risk, of course, that they know you're onto them. Also, you want to, when you're researching some of these awful, awful people, you want to keep those things separate from your day-to-day life. And with a lot of the apps that the far right uses, like Telegram and Instagram, that might surprise people, but those are some incredibly easy apps to set up alternate accounts. Very, very easy. And again, if you want more details on that, we teach this in our trainings. We go through exactly how and why you should create research accounts, is what we call them. Please, for the love of God, use a VPN. Use a paid one, because you should. There are various reasons for this, but one is obviously that if you go to a sort of far-right website or something like that, if you're not using a VPN, they can see from that website where you're coming from, and that could be bad. And lastly, practice good digital hygiene, but you have to keep in mind that what works for some people, like myself, may not work for you. The far right does not, this is not going to be surprising to hear, but the far right does not treat us all equally. I am, a white cisgender male with an English surname. The far right treats me and reacts to me very differently than it would to a person of color, than it would to a woman, than it would to a member of any sort of minority group. And that applies to not even features of your identity that it applies to how they identify you, not even aspects that you identify yourself. So those are things to keep in mind, and that's why I'm not going to wag my finger and say, okay, you should be safe doing this, you should be safe doing that. My experiences in dealing with the far right are inherently tied to facets of my identity, and that is an unfortunate unfairness of doing that kind of work. So I am done there. Thanks for listening. Bellingcat emails are easy to remember, michael@bellingcat.com.
Thank you, Michael.
Can we, the one who have a free seat beside of it, can you raise your hand, and maybe people who are sitting on the floor come in and sit in the chairs instead, and don't block the emergency exit, please.
Let's hear Hannah now.
Hi. Okay, there we go. Okay. So, yeah, I am a researcher and journalist at the Southern Poverty Law Center. For those that don't know, SPLC is a nonprofit based in Montgomery, Alabama. We do a lot of different kinds of work, but the team that I work on is called the Intelligence Project. We basically focus on tracking and exposing far-right extremism. I've been at SPLC since 2019, although I started on this beat kind of part-time in early 2016, mostly writing about the alt-right. So as you can see, I like the movie Dr. Strangelove. And I usually focus on neo-Nazis and the white power movement. This is slight comic relief, I guess. So today I'm going to be talking about an article that I wrote with my colleague Mike Hayden, who's right there. Sorry to point you out. And in December, Mike and I decided brilliantly that we should cover a black tie gala in New York City that was hosted by a group called the New York Young Republican Club. Probably haven't really heard of it. It's an organization that basically has been in New York for years, has become pretty much a vessel for pro-Trump activists in recent years. So we attended this event incognito. We were there for about 5 hours until we were kicked out for asking questions of various speakers. I'll get into that in a little bit. So the reason why we chose to cover this is not because both of us just really like attending black tie galas hosted by pro-Trump activists, although honestly it was kind of funny. It's basically because it was really this who's who of the American far right. I think there were probably, I forget the exact number, but there were definitely at least over 24 speakers and special guests. So I included some of the names here. I mean, there were multiple elected Republican lawmakers. I think the biggest one was Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia. Numerous Trump allies, Donald Trump Jr., obviously Trump's son. Steve Bannon and Rudy Giuliani. Donald Trump Jr. spoke. Bannon and Giuliani were just special guests. And then, I guess more relevant to maybe a fair number of people in this room is there were a fair number of European figures there too. So specifically from Alternative for Germany, the Austrian Freedom Party, and the Hungarian ambassador to the US spoke a little bit. But yeah, it was really a hodgepodge. And you'll see these two names, Peter and Lydia Brimlow. They were not there as special guests or anything, but they're two very prominent white nationalist figureheads who were in attendance, and their presence there is pretty alarming, honestly. So throughout the course of the night, we witnessed multiple speakers embrace rhetoric basically espousing political violence. In particular, they really presented the Republican Party as at war with various perceived political enemies, whether it be the left or, I mean, pretty much anyone, honestly. So I took two clips from Marjorie Taylor Greene. I recorded these, and these are her. In the first one, she's basically talking about how Alex Jones, who's a very prominent American conspiracy theorist, was right about big tech. A lot of, I mean, surely this is in Europe too, but a lot of Americans are under the false belief that tech companies are censoring conservatives. She says that Alex Jones was correct about that. And then in the second one, it is a comment from her saying that if she and Steve Bannon had led the Jan 6 insurrection, she would have won. But I'm introducing them both now because they have to play right after each other. Tested this out yesterday.
You see, we've messed up, conservatives. I'm going to give you guys a little dose of reality. We've given too much power to big tech because we've allowed them to control the narrative. But we've also allowed them to control the narrative because we stay on their platforms. And that is a problem. I want you all to know something. Alex Jones was right. This is an information war. I swear in on January 3rd, I get accused of giving insurrection tours, which I thought was hilarious because I couldn't even find the bathroom at the Capitol. True story. Then January 6th happens, and next thing you know, I organized the whole thing along with Steve Bannon here. And I want to tell you something. If Steve Bannon and I had organized that, we would have won. Not to mention, it would have been armed.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
So I think the oh shit at the end kind of, I mean, exemplifies how I felt hearing that. And it seems to also be how the White House felt hearing that, because around the time we dropped our piece, they issued a statement condemning Marjorie Taylor Greene for this comment. But what I really want to talk about is how we did it. So the SPLC is, I think it's safe to say, not particularly well liked among these communities, and despite everything NYYRC has said, I don't think they really wanted us there. So how can you, as a journalist, attend your own 5-hour black tie gala in the heart of New York City with Steve Bannon for some reason? So I just kind of want to break down 3 things that we did throughout the course of our reporting. So the first one is basically talking about some of the steps that we took to announce avoiding our presence. So yes, I will explain this email. It's a little weird. So the gala required us to buy tickets ahead of time. We were particularly concerned that if we used SPLC emails or any kind of publicly available contact information, that we would probably not be allowed entrance. We have the additional complication that if you search Hannah Gaze, the only thing that shows up is me and someone who's dead. So if I register just fully under my own name, whoops, it's kind of a dead giveaway. So I ended up purchasing 2 tickets using my first and middle name. Used an email that I had set up for other purposes a while back. That was my first and middle name. And that was that. And Mike, his name is a little more common, but he frequently bylines with his middle name, so we just left that out. And as you can see from this exchange in December, this is me adding him as my guest. I blanked out the emails, but I think his mentioned something. It was like Mike Hayden Law or Lawyer or something like that. It's some Yahoo address. And they bought it. So that worked out. The second thing that we did is we really focused our reporting process on documentation. So we knew that we wanted to stay there as long as possible, because if you stay there as long as possible, that's actually how you end up getting what we got, which is 4 to 5 hours of audio and over 100 photos. So as you can see here, these are the two white nationalists I mentioned earlier. This is Lydia Brimlow and her husband Peter Brimlow. Yes, they're married. And that's Steve Bannon right there, and they're taking a selfie. So one thing that we did is it's pretty easy to take photos within the main hall. When they're giving speeches, a lot of people were doing that. But during particularly the cocktail hour, Mike would take photos of me, kind of. It would look like he was, but he would keep missing my head. So to get people in the background. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these ended up being pretty incredible. I didn't include them in here, but there's some pretty funny photos of Raheem Kassam from Breitbart looking at his phone throughout various speeches. They just had no idea that we were there. So the final thing is basically we agreed early on that if we were approached by NYRC, this acronym is really honestly kind of annoying to say. I don't know why they decided on it. If we were approached by NYRC staff, that we wouldn't deny who we work for, and we'd be, I mean, if they asked us if we were journalists, we'd say yes. But again, what we really did want to do is stay there for as long as humanly possible, and we knew that if we blew our cover, that it would be very likely that they kicked us out. We did end up coming up with a cover story, basically using parts of our own personal lives, like that were easy enough to remember, and we're pretending also that we were married. Thankfully, we did not actually have to really use this cover story, but it was primarily just so that if someone at our table tried to talk to us, that we would actually have something to say, other than we're just here because we're reporting. Which, again, would have immediately got us kicked out. And yeah, so how can you also do this if you want to? So just let me first say kind of why I think this kind of reporting is really important. I mean, ultimately what we saw is this wasn't really a private event. You could buy tickets if you wanted to. They were pretty expensive though. I think even our early bird tickets were probably around $250 a person, which is pretty exorbitant, and it's not really easy to get into without a fair amount of approval. But what you ultimately see from events like this is the far right thinking that they're alone and thinking that they're presenting like a different image than they would if they know that journalists are in the room and journalists are paying attention to them. It's a sort of like kind of letting their hair down moment, and we saw a lot of that night, I think. One particular thing comes to mind where it was the white nationalists I mentioned earlier would get a lot of attention from young people and basically walking up to their table, mostly young men, just wanting to talk to Peter Brimlow a lot. And it was interesting and also an alarming interaction to watch. But if you do decide to do this, or something similar, it doesn't have to be a black tie gala, I just include a couple of tips. So obviously, if you're going to something incognito, you don't want to register with your work account. But you also want something moderately professional. You don't really want like, I don't know what a good example would be, like Groiper fan, protonmail.com or something. Like, don't do that. There's obviously it's easy enough to set up an email, but I use my sudo for phone numbers if you need a phone number for registering for something like this. The second point is really be aware of what kind of data you're giving out. I mean, if someone's using a payment processor like PayPal, Stripe, something like that, it limits the amount of information that the seller can see to some extent, but that's not always the case. And even in that case, it's probably a good idea to use some kind of masking tool. So privacy.com and IronVest were the two that came to mind with virtual credit cards. I'm sure there are others. There's also this great old thing called Cash, just an idea. And I mean, these guys also do love cryptocurrency. I wouldn't really recommend that. It mostly just sounds like it's kind of a pain in the butt to get reimbursed for. Third point is don't go alone. I mean, this is just kind of a personal preference and kind of similar to what Michael was saying earlier, is like covering this beat, depending on who you are, depending on your identity, can be a very different experience. And as a woman, going into some of these spaces can be a little bit jarring. So having someone there with you can really help just kind of smooth some of that anxiety over, and also just changes how people might interact with you. But also just broadly, if you're just there observing, having someone there is probably a good thing because people are less likely to interact with you if you're with someone else. And then finally, don't draw attention to yourself until you're prepared to be kicked out. So we managed to make it through the entire night, probably over 4 hours, close to 5 hours. And then we decided to start asking questions of the special guests and some of the speakers. And I think maybe the period of time in which we started introducing ourselves as journalists to the time when we kicked out was maybe somewhere in between 10 to 20 minutes. It was not very long that we were able to really stay there as overt members of the press. So and also things can get very heated fast. So ultimately, you just kind of want to know when you've got to leave. And unlike these guys, I was very stupid and forgot to do a slide at the end of this with my contact information. But if you're on Twitter, I'm pretty easy to find. Like I said, you can just Google me, and the only thing that comes up is really me, and you can not the person who was around in 1940. That's not me. So that's it.
Thank you, Hannah.